PR Connections Radio presents
Voices of humanity, we need to hear your voices. We need to hear your voices. Welcome, everybody. Welcome to the Voices of Humanity at prconnectionsradio.com, the voice of new media. I am your host, Sandra McKechnie, and this lovely lady is my guest. And she's going to introduce herself. I wanted to say a little bit about what she does. I know people may be watching it, and so you followed. I think we're in our, which show, how many shows have we done together?
We're on 12 today.
Oh my goodness, yes. So we've got some really great content for you. It's really just a discussion. The show is fueled by double consciousness with two B's, and it's a concept put forward by W.E.B. Du Bois, social reformer. Amazing stuff. Very controversial, which is exciting. And it has to do with two streams of thought, two social identities, and in between, this is the struggle. Two streams of thought, two social identities regarding the people that came through the time warp hundreds of years ago, my people, and that came through apartheid, colonization, colonialism, all of that, and how they show up and why they show up, how they show up in the 21st century. It has really amalgamated into all people in the sense that everyone was involved in this. Those that were complicit, those that were not, and we're not looking for victims, but the fact is, it's not your fault or mine. I wasn't there either, but together we can do something about it. A lot has been passed on from generation to generation, even if we weren't there. Sometimes, we're confused, right? Because we respond a certain way in the 21st century. And we wonder, where did this come from? Why do I do this? Why do I lighten my skin? What is that all about? Why do I respond this way to people of color, to Indigenous people? And how do I feel? Do I have discrimination? Am I prejudiced? All of these things we look at, and again, it's not your fault or mine, but together we can do something about it. Please put your hands together for Lorrie Simunovic. Oh my goodness. I'm going to read a quote first. I think that's how it's supposed to go. We are picking up from last week, and it's really under meritocracy, and then Lorrie's going to give you the big umbrella of what that looks like, and we're going to go from there. All right, this is our quote. This is really what we're doing and what we're about these last few shows. Understand that the notion of meritocracy within a system that promotes systemic racism is a myth. And this myth maintains the mythological notion that there is no such thing as racism. All right, Lorrie, you want to hit them with our umbrella?
Sure. So what we're trying to do is dig in a little bit deeper into these myths that are culturally, socially, politically, etc. created. And we have three objectives. One is throughout all 12 shows, I believe, develop a critical understanding of the history and impact of Eurocentricity. And we had a whole show, I think, just on Eurocentricity, basically Western European culture positioning itself as dominant. While it's, we can get into that more deeper later. Developing critical, the second objective is to develop, and I include myself, this is a lifelong learning process, developing critical consciousness and cultural humility, where we get out of the matrices of domination, intersections of domination and subordination, and that we somehow, even through love, beyond the personal love, like through very kind of compassionate, empathic, flatter ways of dancing in love and being together. And I don't mean this in any kind of weak way. I mean it as we're learning from each other. Right, we're like you just said. For example, there's double consciousness, and there's many other streams of consciousness, and bringing those sections together so that we together heal. And the last one is promoting social justice and equity, because as long as we have injustice and equity, you can't breed love. You can't breed community
Mm.
in injustice. And so if we promote and social justice and equity by taking action, like you get the awareness, but then what's the action? I know in your courses you link those together, the awareness and the action, to dismantle this notion of cultural superiority or
Mm.
Eurocentric structures and practices, and it involves advocating for inclusion of non-European perspectives in education and all domains within. In this context, I'm most familiar with the North American context. So we have a lot of work to do.
Amen. So I was thinking the one thing that stood out for me last time, and we've talked about this before, decoloniality, decolonization of the mind, and what that means to us too. We've had our conversations. That was one thing that stuck out for me. And the other thing that I thought was lovely was cultural humility as opposed to cultural superiority. Cultural humility, bringing all our pieces to the table and really being humble about it. I've got 2 cats here that are keeping noise. I'm sorry. There's the spray. Okay. Yeah, so that's really what I was left with a lot of. And just it's this responsibility of really looking at ourselves and working on ourselves. And I love the element of love that we want to put into this week too. And just to even, my idea about love might not be yours. And as you're watching it, you might think, what's love got to do with it? In the words of Tina, but yes, there's so actually, Lorrie's going to go through, right, some of the myths. I think that's what we're going to do now, and then tie it all in, kind of a thing, the cultural.
In a very positive way, triggered something when you talked about the cultural humility piece. And very short definition here to position the myths then. So cultural humility is an interrelational approach to learning and interacting with people across various cultures. It involves self-reflection, openness, and a commitment to lifelong learning. Developing the skills to communicate and collaborate effectively across cultural differences. Of course, we could write a whole book just on that, but that's a very small definition, positioning it in liberation, freedom, consciousness. I'm not conscious. I'm semi-conscious. I don't even know if I'm semi-conscious. Right?
That takes a lifetime, I understand.
Yes.
I'm more awake than I was.
I'm pretty sure that on my deathbed, I will not be fully conscious. So it's a process, but that process is what can lead us to different forms of social justice and change and transformation and so on. So you asked me to go to the myths.
Self-reflection, that's huge, right? Yeah. Open to lifelong learning. Oh my goodness. And that takes such humility. We're talking about cultural humility here too. That takes humility because there's so many trains of thought, even in faith. And I'm big with my faith and what I believe. And then someone else comes along and they've got something else, but we can learn. And I love the aspect of open to lifelong learning, whether I agree with you or not. We show a measure of respect and really? Okay. And this is what I feel about that. And I mean, you and I differ in a number of ways in terms of that topic, but I think whatever the topic is, I think there has to be a reciprocal, that would be nice if we could have the reciprocity in terms of, we're both learning here. And I think you and I have that. That's why we've probably done so many shows, right?
And there are multiple truths. I've said this on other shows with you. Neil Bohr, a physicist, said the opposite of a fact is a falsehood, right? Whereas the opposite of one profound truth might be another profound truth. We don't tend to think about in plurality, which is what you're talking about right now, right? So it's getting outside of the right wrong binary and weaving those truths together and respecting difference and unity. I think
that doesn't have to mean agreement, because I certainly may not agree.
Of course, we don't have to agree either.
Yeah,
that's right. Why I said difference.
For sure.
Right. So sorry, I said that too sharp. Forgive me.
No, go girl. Come on. Makes for a good show. Sharpen up.
Right. So I agree with you. There are going to be times where we just really disagree on things, and that's okay. Yes. And how do we still, live in empathy and emotional intelligence and, loving. Your experience is completely different than mine when it comes to racism. Completely.
Right? Yeah. Yeah.
I
Sure.
don't dare speak to that. I mean, I can speak to it, from what I know interrelationally, but there are topics I don't touch, right? And if I were to dare to disagree with you on your experience, like that, to me, that would be disrespectful.
Well, yes, and I to you, like, it's your experience. But I love you do trainings as well, and you coach. I do coach as well, backed by the International Coaching Federation. And Lorrie's been out here doing her thing for years. She's a writer. Tell them a little bit about you. I know we're going back into we're going to go back to our myths, but tell them a little bit. So.
So I worked for almost my entire career in organizations in various capacities as a consultant, as an educator, and so on, in diversity, equity, and inclusion. And for the last few years now, I've been the president of my own company called Get Braver Incorporated. And three key pieces that I work on, and that's from what I've learned over the years and what I'm still learning, is the conversations are so important, right? So
Yeah,
the center of it. So facilitating threshold conversations, which is basically organizations, groups, people in general have a compass point where they want to go somewhere, right? And people want to achieve something in this context of for example, the 3 learning objectives that we were talking about. And there's pivotal moments where we come together and we learn from each other. And so the notion of 1 + 1 is 2, but 1 + 1 is 3 also. It's like a third reality that's, gosh, she's Spanish. I'm trying to remember. Mexican, sorry. And Delua is the one that introduced me to her, to that concept. And when you come into this third reality, then the compass might go just wait, we didn't think about that, or it's like, we're going to go way over here. But that's going to come out of those conversations. And then there's collective, but there's also on a leadership level, people, because we are set up, from top to bottom in hierarchies and individualism and competition, right? That's the reality. And while it's problematic, there are ways, for example, through executive coaching and training, to still have that, and it's challenging, but organizations are really willing to, the leaders want to be coached in groups and as individuals of how to be more inclusive, of how to take into considerations issues of equity on all levels, everything from partnership to HR and so on, right? And of course, that involves content curation and creation, which is kind of what you and I are doing now.
Yeah, inclusion. I wonder sometimes about that, but that's another.
Because I have been in situations where it's window dressing, right?
Yeah.
And I don't know if people realize it's window dressing. I want to be generous. I really am very interested in, digging deeper, like radical, meaning to the root as opposed to fringe. Like,
is that a myth too? Inclusion?
Inclusion. To a great extent it is, because of the way that our societies are set up. I remember a story listening. I know I talk about her a lot. I just love her. I wish she were still alive. Bell Hooks, when she was in the classroom and she was talking to her students, and exactly what you just said, that some of the students were saying, well, white people really don't care, right? And then she reminded them of the few people that died, when they were marching with Martin Luther King and so on. And they said, yeah, but that's just a few. And she said, yeah, but that's hope.
Oh, definitely. Oh, my goodness. What was that?
Like, and I'm not making excuses for white people, because I don't disavow my whiteness. I'm part of that. And I want to know when I'm not on point. I want to go as far as I can and, not take over and think I know everything, but also, so it's a learning process, right? So.
Yes, it's not your fault or mine, girl, but together we can do something about it, right? And dispelling the myths for us were a pretty big thing too. Just whatever you think, you might not agree, but there's certain things that we found, and Lorrie's a master researcher, and so she's out there trying to do her thing and look at what the stats say, and it's not. And I always say to people sometimes, I said, you don't have to stat us. Generations. We are the stats. We know how we feel. We know how we live. We get in a room, and there is definitely, we're sympathetic, and we're like, we go around a room and say, no way, that happened to you. That happened to you too. That's what woke me up because it was almost sort of goes without saying that, shh, don't talk about it. Master will hear you in the big house.
Yeah.
And so we weren't allowed, don't shh. And so we went through years, hundreds of years like that. And it's so wonderful to sit with some sister girls. I got white sister girls too. But, the ones that whole, you know what I'm saying, that we understand what we go through when we enter a room and we feel we have to leave parts of ourselves here, different places, right? We're so assimilated. Oh, I got to put on the white me. There's two streams of thought, two social identities. That's what I'm talking about. There could be three, So, or four, but how we show up. And that's why I see the power of love is so important. The streets are full of young, Black, beautiful brothers that are killing each other out here. And the more I am feeling such a connection as I'm partial, excuse me, but the word may be partial. In terms of connecting with my people, we are stronger together, more together, Lorrie, than we are apart. So I can't stay over here and say, well, I don't want to talk to them. Look at them. I'll just assimilate further into whiteness, when that's not going to do me any good anyway. Right?
It's interesting that you just said that like,
right.
who isn't partial to their family or to their whiteness, for example, whether we admit it or not.
Oh, I hear you. Oh, definitely. And people are not sort of shy about saying that either, or telling people that, you shouldn't marry that person. No, don't marry no Black man. People have not been shy in front of my people by sharing that. Yes. And I think, so that to me is self-respect. When I have a partiality in terms of this work, in terms of connecting with my people, it actually, it's like a blanket, and it can cover us in love and hope when we really get down in the nitty-gritty.
Community building.
Yes. And then we're honest about what we feel. We're honest about our hair and what we were told about it. Things like that. All of those myths.
I'm sure you know a lot more about this than I do when whether it's in the workplace or somewhere, when a group of, all Black people, for example, or all African people, however they self-identify, come together, there's kind of this, like what's going on? There's almost a fear, right, that something is going to be happening. Meanwhile, that same sensibility doesn't happen when I know I've gone into rooms in equity work where it's dominantly white. And I would just like, I don't get this, right? I mean, I do, but I don't. Right. And that's the work. So that's when you talk about it. Is it really inclusion? Is it a myth, or is it?
I know, because there is a reputation, and we feel it too. We talk about it. We feel it when, God help you, if you got a room full of Black boys and they're not doing anything, and they happen to be in a room just gathered, and they're, maybe they're having a meeting or there's a social. It's a scary thing for people. People might not want to admit it. Of course, sometimes people don't even know where it comes from. I feel that way sometimes. I've told you the story because of how assimilated we are, right? So even that, oh my goodness, when I went to this Dairy Queen in Toronto here, and a friend of mine was with me, a Black girl, one of my sister girls, and we were going to get ice cream. And of course, she opened the car, we're on the way in. And there are these two Black guys. They have their hoodies on, and I can't see them. And I don't know what they're talking about. Oh my gosh, what are they doing? I said this to her. I said, they look like they're going to rob the place. And she went, I can't stand you. I can't stand you. This is just the way we talk, right? And I said, why would they look at it? She said, how do you know that I'm here to get ice cream? And she went, and she grabbed her bag and she went to the Dairy Queen. And what were they doing there? Well, they were there to rob the joint, of course. No, they were there to buy ice cream. Mm-hmm. And I realized, yes, for so long, this is something we are taught. Okay, my dad would say, well, why are they dressed like that? They should be dressed. Well, that's how they dress. And how do we know they're not there to buy ice cream? And of course they were, So don't be scared if you see two guys in a hoodie licking an ice cream cone. I'm Sorry.
That's really interesting because it's like that for white people. There's an inclination. Well, it's the way that they're dressed or whatever. But your emotional integrity is like, no, there's a piece around. These are Black young men who are dressed with hoodies. Would I react? Would you react in the same way to a white person in a hoodie? Maybe, I don't know. But even then, it would be different.
Yeah, even then, because even as I look at my heart and I think of the way I'm assimilated into whiteness, right? Yes. It's been beat out of us for years, right? And you mentioned, I always tell the story. Massa has this little video, and he's looking at it, and he calls, the Black man, the slave, and he says, "Look through there. What do you see? What do you see?" And you're seeing everything that Massa does. He's whipping, he's raping, he's doing everything, sodomy, acts of power. And this man is looking and going, "I see you." And Massa says to the slave, "Well, yeah, I want you to be just like me. Act like me, walk like me, take this whip and beat to death your own people like me. Mm-hmm. But at the end of the day, remember, you're not me, you're refuse, you're nothing." Mm-hmm. And so years of coming through that, being it passed on. Yeah, I wasn't there. But there's things that I do in the 21st century. So I think I have to tell myself, Lorrie, these are myths. This is a myth. This isn't true. Who you are and how you feel. It's not true that your head's nappy and you're not worth nothing. And the darker the skin, the more dehumanized. That's an action that is real. That can be very real. But it's not you. It's not who you are. It's not true. That's a myth for you, right? You can change that. Yeah. What do you think?
Yeah, I agree. I'm just remembering. I've probably told the story already, but it comes back to me. His last name was Levy. I don't remember. Anyway, it was, gosh, about 25 years ago. And I was very friendly with the man that worked with youth, and I'd already worked with youth that had done a lot of work with people from various social locations. And I tended to work in what was constructed as the toughest situation. So I got a lot of exposure. Anyway, he was working with some young people in the mall, and I was standing beside him. He's a big, tall man of African descent, a former football player. And so these young people were coming up, and I could just feel them. They were just beautiful. They loved him. And so I just stepped forward. I was kind of being really white in that I just shook their hand, right? And they're looking at me and he's looking at me. And I thought, oh shit, did I do something wrong? And so I asked him later, like I said, hi, and they were friendly, but there was kind of this tentativeness for me shaking their hand. So I thought, is it religious? I didn't know. He said later, like, do you know, like he at the time had worked with a lot of white people, but that a lot of white people in that situation would be scared because they're in the mall. They were like clean cut. They were smiling. They were, well, clean cut, even that term, right? And I'm not trying to make myself a hero in the situation. I happened to have a lot of exposure, and I was with somebody that I trusted, and had been exposed to different communities. But even in that context, he thought it was like something amazing that I would shake their hands. Like, wild.
Probably was his experiences. Yeah.
No, and he told me that, right? Yeah. That was his experience. And he thought it was something beautiful, but it also made me sad. Right. Right. I mean, I do the same thing with, and well, even youth, like with young white youth who have been quote unquote disenfranchised by society. Right. Mm-hmm. And I'm taking them seriously, and we're going to, create this plan, whatever. And people like, why? Like, why wouldn't you go into a corporation? And anyway, it's interesting.
Yeah, I want to actually at this point throw out a couple of resources. It's just coming to me heavy. Okay. One of them is two books. One by a lady named Catrice Jackson called Weapons of Whiteness. Catrice Jackson, Weapons of Whiteness. And another one by Carol Roberts. Is it Carol Roberts? Anyway, the book is called Where Did All the White Rage Go? Where Did All the White Rage Go? And I'm naming these two books because it's challenging sometimes when we don't see or we don't understand what somebody's talking about. Or I talk to the Indigenous people. I had a sister on my show, and she was speaking to me about what's safe for them, that people can't tell them what's safe. We always, we hear this thing sometimes, oh, it's safe. It's a safe space. What's that? She said, what does that mean? I need to tell you how I'm safe. So I give you those two books, those resources, so that you can just kind of look at it, if you can, with an open mind. If you want to get those books, Catrice Jackson, Weapons of Whiteness, and Carol Roberts, I believe it is, Carol Henderson. Anyway, her book is Where did all the white rage go?
And who's the author of The White Rage?
Carol Henderson, I think her name is. Oh, that she's great. And the thing is, she's really a political giant as well as she is research. She's learned. She understands what she's talking about. And I really would love people to. I'm looking at that. This woman, yeah, she's really helped fashion my life when I woke out of sleep. Anderson, I think that's her. Yes, it is Carol Anderson. She
Anderson
is
or Henderson?
Anderson. Where did all the white rage go? And her thing was, well, yeah, where did it just disappear? All of the hatred, when you think about it, hatred for Indigenous peoples, what happened to them? All of that, where did it go? You know, where did it go?
It went to quiet, and as things started changing, I think just because white people are being more silent about it, they're knowing it's not the right thing to say, but it doesn't mean it's gone away.
Yes,
absolutely. I just said there. We know. Sorry.
Yes.
To implicate myself.
Yes.
No, I'm not a person, but I am, right? We're all
yes. Where did it go? It's so true. Where did it go? And I would submit that sometimes it comes out in the I love the upper echelons of management. It comes out there without people intentionally. It's just something that happens. That what are we talking about? The power move that you talk about a lot. The statement that you make, I love it. The myth of cultural superiority. No, not that one. But you say the statement a lot, and power. That whole thing. A person could be the humblest or seemingly right, and then something happens. Okay, I'll give the story. You've got the next half 20 minutes to start the myths. Where I'm talking about.
You go.
The power. Remember, I told you I was telling her about this story. My mom was working in the hospital. When I talk about power, that it just kind of pushes its way through like it's alien. I put that down to alien. This is just triggering me to remember. Do you remember? There's this thing that happens. Okay, weapons of where did all the white rage go? Okay, so my mom. Okay, let me stay on one topic. My mom worked with this wonderful woman, loved her. My mom just came home all the time. She would be talking about this woman. And I was like, oh, wow, okay. She's so sweet. And then she'd say how she talked to her. This lady was white, and she'd say, oh, Simone, oh, dear. And she had this love. She just loved her, you know. And, you know, it was just infused with glucose, this manner this woman had, all sweetness. So when my mom, one day something went awry. My mother came home and she told me something that she did that was so terrible and a little discriminatory, I must say. But my mom, it woke her up as if someone slapped her in the back of her head. And I said to her, because I met the lady, I used to go and meet mommy there, right? And we go out to dinner or something. And then mom says, and I said, Mom, and mom was so hurt. She was really hurt because this woman was just sweet all the time. She couldn't imagine that she was something different. And I said, Mom, it was kind of sickening sweet though. You know, I don't think Mr. Insulin could have take all of that glucose and fit it in the cell. Like it was just, you know what I'm saying? So it was very painful, and it reminded me of how, and mom felt very dehumanized because of the whole situation, that it just flipped, and it just changed. And so I think about that, and I think about if we support people in areas of social justice and et cetera, which I have, and I'm telling you, it almost cripples you when you see someone speaking, whether it's an Indigenous person, a Black person, for whatever reason, a person from India, depending on where the person's coming from. I recognize then, as a person of color, that what the pseudoscientists did was they had classified us into races at the bottom of the rung, right? So you have your Eurocentric people. First, you have your American Indians, Indigenous people, and then you continue. At the bottom of the rung, Blacks, right? The darker the skin, the more dehumanized. And even though we say it was dispelled, right? But it's still it's still here. It's passed on with us like Alien, that movie. You know, it's still with us, some of it. So we really have to, it's morphed into something else. So, Lorrie, that's enough said with me. I just thought that was great. See where we go? We just lead into
No,
something. This different conversation.
that's a prime example. That's not even a microaggression. That's a macroaggression. It's like, do you know who I am? Don't you dare make a mistake. Like, I don't know what the mistake was or what or even perceived. Like, there's no sense of humility. There's no sense of respect. And like you just said, the saccharine kindness. You can just feel it. Like, you knew it, right? And I don't know enough about your mother to even comment on that piece, but how oppressive, right? So
Yeah, it was for her. We had a
and
few
then
of
there's
those.
tools I'm sure your mother uses to heal from it, but I wouldn't. I personally, just even hearing this story, and I admit I'm being prejudiced, but I wouldn't want to go near that woman. I know she has to heal too, right?
Right,
I would
right, for sure. For sure.
and, you know, and who knows? Maybe I'll work with her one day, and maybe she'll have an insight, and maybe she'll heal. But wow, that's a lot of hurt.
Yeah, and again, it's not anybody's fault, but we can do something about it, and we can call it out. We can say something. We can do something. So I think that's important. Lorrie, let's move on and try and get a few.
Okay. Okay. So in terms of the myths. So generally, I'll just repeat what I did in the last. It's a traditional story or narrative that typically explains beliefs, customs, origins of natural phenomena of a particular culture or society. Sometimes it involves supernatural beings, but again, there's a purpose to the myth. Gods, goddesses, heroic figures, symbolic events. Is in order to serve to convey cultural values, moral lessons, and provide a sense of identity and meaning to individuals and communities. What comes to me when I talk about cultural values, like when you think about Little Red Riding Hood, I honestly don't believe that if there was a Little Red Riding Hood, that she would believe that a wolf is her grandmother. Like, that's just silly.
Yes.
Right. And if we're not unpacking that today, right? But it's giving a message to children.
Definitely.
And there's sexism, there's all kinds of stuff going on there. Right. So that's why these, there are people who are writing alternative stories I actually was writing one the other day of how she just stayed away from that wolf. She knew it was a wolf. Right. So that's an alternative narrative.
Very interesting. I wonder what the other one, if people really sat and unpacked that thing about the wolf, what that would look like. You know what I mean? What does that do to the mind of our kids as they're reading that whole myth?
Right. And there's many stories like that, the Grimm fairy tales, right?
Yeah.
When I think about it, right? Because those are all kind of Eurocentric stories. And while there's some good stuff that comes out about, there are pieces that are ingrained in there that aren't so good. Right. And so that's why people like Bell Hooks wrote, she didn't even want to write children's stories, but she realized that's part of how she was going to give back, and wrote the Nappy Hair book. And something beautiful, a beautiful thing came out of that around the hair piece. Right. So anyway, you wanted me to say what we've covered. Some of them.
I like those cultural values thing. I think that's great. I'm going to segue. I know. Keep where you were.
Yeah.
Funny thing is, there's so much going on the planet right now. When you talk about cultural values and different things are in our school system, where parents are losing the mandate to guide and protect their own children. We're talking senior kindergarten children are very concerned and being reprimanded because they're using the wrong pronouns and all of these things. And I think to myself, they're 5 years old. So there's a lot of different things going on around that. Parents are feeling like they don't have the power. They don't have, I can't use, for lack of a better word. Or have any sort of mandate. And I think to myself, there's a system that people have. And now it's really gone too far, but there's a lot of parents, doctors, psychiatrists, people are speaking out, which I'm very proud of that, because I didn't realize there was so much going on. But we've got little children. It's really changing the system, the value system, and the right. And the opportunity and the privilege for a parent to make those decisions at such a young age for their children, to help their children make, you know what I mean? It really, it's crippling the sense of family and the way that you are able to. I'll tell you, I was speaking to a number of people from India, and they said, our children, oh no, there's no way. Our children, we'd rather send them home so that they can get a sense fundamentally of our value system. And I think and then they can come back here. I think that's to be respected, because there's a lot going on with our little children that I'm telling you, it burns me up. But anyway, we can leave that. It bothers me tremendously.
Yeah.
And imposing certain things on our children before they've even had a chance to, they're not even 12.
Well, that's the whole thing around education. I know that you and I differ in some areas, so I won't go too deeply in that. Like around the pronouns, I respect that. Having said that, there are ways to educate, and unless we have all the voices there, and we're talking about inclusion and ways that aren't going to either indirectly or directly promote hatred, for example, or
bullying. There's a lot of bullying
and that kind of thing.
Yeah.
So again, it's the whole love ethic in
social. I'm glad we're on it. I'm glad we're on it, because I didn't think, a lot of people wouldn't think they'd see the day where they feel that they do not have the mandate to raise their own children, right? And to do it in the way that culturally, perhaps their value system may be different, but they don't have
I totally agree, because I mean, in the context, I'm of Croatian heritage, and there's a lot of kind of collectivity versus individualism.
True.
So I found myself in two streams, right? Just on that piece. Now, many of my family members are also highly individualistic, but I was highly influenced by my father around the collective piece when we would talk around that, and especially when I met my relatives in Croatia. I think the first time I met them, I was 15. So that highly influenced me. And if I had more of that, because mom and dad were trying to survive with work and so on, right? When I was growing up, I would at least have the double consciousness. So I had to learn some of that stuff. So, and it's because it wasn't being taught in the schools, right? And so in the African context, it's,
same thing.
Cultural. Yeah.
I love it. I remember I was saying to you this, I was coaching someone, and they from Nigeria, and they were seeming to think that they had to assimilate on some level, and they were so wounded by it. They said, I can't fit in like that here. And I had to say to them, which, technically I guess we're not supposed to. I said, well, girl, you just be you. Are you trying to fit in? I'm trying to be you. I'm trying to be like you when I grow up. Where that sense of culture, you've got your name, you've got your ethnicity. I've lost my name. The ships took us. It took everything. So, and you know what I mean? I'm trying to get her to think.
I know who my relatives are. I got you. Yeah.
You've got something precious here. Yeah. So the cultural value is huge. Yeah. That collectivity, the people that came across the trade, etc. We lost a lot of that. Yes. So getting it back, I love to look at my Nigerian brothers and sisters gone, all of the places, a lot of countries in the continent. I just love to see their value system. It's amazing.
Right.
I mean, they got a lot of, nobody's perfect, but there's a lot that we just don't have here, right?
Right.
Continue, hon. I interrupted. I think this is great. Okay, we're talking about cultural values.
Okay. And so the claim that intersections of myths create a foundation, of myths create a foundation for white supremacy, capitalism, imperialism, a patriarchal system, and we could go on, suggests its analysis of how various mythologies and belief systems intersect and contribute to oppressive cultures. So that's why I just gave the tiny example of the wolf, right? There's many more, and there are cultural critics, who I think there's a movie called Real by Real, actually I haven't seen it yet, but it was I heard about it at a talk the other day. So when we're fish swimming in the water, we don't even know we're swimming in the water, right? And there's a whole bunch of stuff that's going on, and we start to become aware of that. So whatever we learned, right? But if the things that we've learned are hurting us, are, people are coloring their skin and so on, stuff we talked about later. I mean, because of the myth of shadism, that the lighter the better. Like, what nonsense.
I know, logically for us, it's like, what? In my sort of some part of my brain, it's ridiculous, even though I've lived it. It's ridiculous. Yeah.
Right. And so the last time I had there's many, I had about 15 that I had read out in the last podcast with you. And some of the ones that we covered were the myth of racism. It still exists. It's not a myth, right? On individual, ideological, and a systemic level, and that plays itself out in many ways. And over the podcast, we spoke to a lot of that. Shadism, as I just mentioned, the link of cultural superiority and assimilation. You have to assimilate. Well, on one level, it's true. You do have to assimilate. You're going to have a hard time, but you don't. There's people who haven't, right? Resistance, somebody can say, like from the show, the Star Trek, resistance is futile, right? I don't think resistance is futile. I think resistance is healthy. It's a form of collective and self-love. When you resist oppression, I don't think it's, I think even when it's not in love, I would love it to be in love, but there's anger, there's fierce anger because whole communities have been harmed or exterminated.
Yes.
Right. So, so that dispels the whole kind of cultural superiority piece. I
love that. I think that's one of my favorite. Cultural humility is really the key. And to be humble. I don't think we can be very strong and look superior, but still be humble people.
I remember in an organization once, a senior person, a white woman, I used to talk about humility because I'd been taught by many leaders. And I only said it a few times. And she said, if you say humble one more time, I'm out. She got really angry at me. Oh. Because she believed that confidence didn't, and she Copperfield, what was the story? I don't know. I haven't read it. I didn't study English, but there's apparently a character that's really humble, but just like really self-effacing. And that's what she found humility to be, right? Okay. You're not talking about that. You're talking about, but it closed the door because of her dominance. She was in a rank above me. And there was no room for me to speak at that point. That didn't stop me from talking about cultural humility, right? But I knew there were instances where I had to be very careful what I say.
Good for you. It has to be said. We were talking about love. I was looking at that quote.
Sorry?
Oh, as we were talking about love and humility and versus cultural humility versus cultural superiority, I was thinking of that scripture that says, love your neighbors yourself. And I always think, I never used to think about the yourself thing, but when I started to really look into caring for me, my weight, my health, different things, right? Waking up to what really happened to my people, looking at it, even though it's ugly, not pretending it didn't happen. And passing some of that on, and now realizing, okay, everybody, every nation, come on, it's not our fault. We can do something about it, though.
Right.
Because everybody's been enslaved and have had oppression on some level in their people. But, and you said we're not competing for, what's the term you use? Competing for oppression. What is it?
The hierarchies of oppression.
Hierarchies of oppression.
Yeah,
that's
not mine. I learned that somewhere.
Oh, did you like it? Yeah. But I mean, that's not where I'm coming from. But it is like, let's get in and see. Like, if a house is burning over here, you're going to send the fire truck there, right?
Yeah, and if you look at the stats, I remember around mental illness, one of the consultants that I worked with many years ago, I was a community health consultant at the time, says we need to know the how mental illness is created, right? And that's a very, very worthy thing. But I am more concerned that 87% of people who have severe mental illness are not working. And it's not because we can't, because we're all on the spectrum. That's why I'm saying we. It's because the minute a person gets a diagnosis, they're discriminated against. If they know, right? So it's similarly, with black skin. I mean, you can't hide that, right? No, we can't. So when you talk about love and self-reflection, I mean, when you've talked about internalized oppression and that kind of thing, and even today, right? And if we move towards collectively and individually, and this is in Bell Hook's book, All About Love. Oh my God, she's written a number of books on love and community. She's written 40 books, and All About Love, New Visions. She actually talks about love and self-reflection.
Yeah, let's get into that.
Yeah, and she talks about emphasizing the significance of self-love and self-awareness as essential aspects of fostering love in relationships and in communities, right? And she argues that self-reflection and personal growth are critical to creating a world where love and social justice thrive. So, we talk in the psychological context, we talk about dysfunctional families, right? But where did those dysfunctional families the reason many of our families, and I include mine because I don't know how many are functional, because we all have some dysfunction. I'm not saying all, like the world, but I'll say, no, all is the wrong word. Many of us have dysfunction. But and she talks about how that's why she left. I've talked to you about this before. That's why she left academia, because it's just as dysfunctional. Those same patterns are there. So in the context of self-love, right? Any form of domination, particularly that's fired up, as you were speaking to earlier, was saccharine hatred, because that wasn't love, which that woman was showing your mother, right? How do we transform that into love, right? How do we influence each other? So, like, I think for that lady woman, what it would take is your mother saving her life and go, oh, you saved my life, and maybe she but does it need to be that extreme, right?
Yeah.
So, how can we? She talks about love and accountability, emphasizing that love is not passive; it requires accountability and active engagement, urging individuals to challenge oppressive systems and behaviors, not only in society but also within ourselves, in our families, in our workplaces, and so on. And this accountability is essential to achieving social justice and building authentic connections, conversations, systems, and so on. Love can be a transformative force. Throughout her book, this particular book, she presents love as a transformative force capable of breaking down barriers and building bridges between individuals. She sees love as a powerful tool for healing collective wounds, and you've talked about that before, and promoting understanding, solidarity, and positive change. Love can be a foundation. I've got about 10 points here, but for social justice, arguing that love is not just an emotion or personal feeling, but a powerful force. That's kind of more the agape love, AGAPE, that can serve as the foundation for social justice. Genuine love, according to Hooks, is rooted in care, empathy, and compassion, I would add, emotional intelligence, I'm sure she would agree, with and for others, which can lead to a more just and equitable society. Love and equality. If we have inequality, that's not love, right? So again, Hooks contends that love and justice are inherently connected, and that love is central to the pursuit of equality and liberation. The reason we seek safety is because there is no safety. But then if we stay in that place of seeking safety, then freedom and consciousness and liberation, there's a different way of getting there.
Equality, equity, and I wonder, is it? I don't know. I'm just thinking, are we meant to be all equal? In what way, you think? Like, I don't know. I'm just thinking out loud.
Well, I think if you have stats where people who are racialized as Black and people who are racialized as white, and they have the exact same job, but there's a 30% difference.
Yeah. And that makes it different then. Remember, the whole thing with the two stools, and the guy is tall and he's trying to look over the fence, and there's a little girl trying to look over the fence. So that's why I wondered, like, some people will say, but that's not fair. She's got, he's got one stool and she's got, whatever, right? But what's fair? It's interesting. A friend of mine, and this is a practical, one of her children suffered with seizures and epilepsy, and had some real challenges. And she's had to, with 5 children, she had to zero in. All the others got such love, and they're beautiful babies. They're grown men and women today. Grown men, one little woman. And honestly, she said to her, I love all of you, but I had to focus a lot on this particular child because he needed more. That was what was fair. But everybody got love. So I'm just thinking in that kind of scenario.
So, well, because I was not quoting, I was interpreting Bell. She contends that love and justice are inherently connected.
Okay.
And that love is central to the pursuit of equality and liberation.
Okay.
She criticizes systems of oppression and inequality that prevent individuals from experiencing love and respect, highlighting the importance of dismantling these systems for the collective well-being. So she had a very specific analysis, and she would go much deeper. I mean, she wrote books on it, right? So this is just like one paragraph of my understanding, and I'm certainly willing to be challenged by the scholars.
But it's inspirational because, in a sense, it's like, you know, you have 5 children. One has more need than, you know, you have to focus on that more. You love all of them, but because, you know, you don't have my equal time, like this one needs, like he needs a lot more time, but because I haven't divvied it up, it doesn't mean that you are not all equal, because his need is more than your need.
Right.
Now, in
That
terms
child,
of, you know?
in an individualistic child, maybe 4 of those children or 3 of those children or 2, I don't know. Every child is different in terms of temperament, in terms of what's going on for them. But if they really are, I've seen it in dysfunctional families, right? I shouldn't label it that way, but they've labeled it themselves later once they healed, right? Where one child just doesn't, like, they were literally motherless and fatherless children. They had the mother and father there, for example, or just the mother, just the father, etc. But they weren't nurtured, right? So there is an impact, there's a trauma that the person might feel. However, that's a very individualistic context. If somehow you build community where it's not just the Eurocentric, it has to be just mom and dad, where you have a whole community of people that take care. Like, friends have told me that when kids would walk in the street in, say, Barbados or whatever, an older person would treat the child as their own, and would offer this child the respect, but the child would also have to offer them respect. So the whole collective context was really important. So family was extended. It wasn't just this kind of nuclear thing. And we come up with something where it can happen. But when we're working in when we're working in a system that's very oppressive and doesn't.
But I didn't mean that literally for family. I'm saying that when you're in a scenario where people are saying fair or equity, there's the group of people, say it's Indigenous people, it's whoever. Where's the need? Right? Like, there's a need there. You may need 2 or 3 stools to see over the fence, and somebody else needs 1. Okay. Well, no, they've got 3. I need 3 too. But where the need is, that's equitable.
That's equity.
Yeah.
You have to do something different. Okay, I misunderstood you.
No, that's where I was heading with that, is that child has a need, and that is fair, because I have to give this, but you don't need the same amount of stools to see over the fence as they do, you know, kind of
Thank
a thing.
you for that correction. I just jumped right in there.
Oh, that's all right. No. You were ready. Oh my goodness. But that's good. We got a few more minutes because we have the little commercial to do and all that stuff. Yeah, I think, how many myths did we share today? I think 2. Okay, for the last few minutes, just so we wind it up really well, can you just name off some of the myths that, so that they, in case people are wondering where we were heading?
Shadism, post-racialism, like there's no more race problems, which of course is not true. Reverse racism, assimilation, all lives matter. Of course, all lives do matter, but it's that term is a response to Black Lives Matter. The single story narrative, neutral objective spaces, colorblind education, cultural appropriation, model minority myth, deficit-based myth. It reinforces and justifies existing power imbalances, hindering efforts towards true equity, equality, and justice.
How many were that? How many is that?
I think it's about 15. 1, 2, 3, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14. It's 14?
Okay.
14 or 15.
All right. Now, have you got more on for next time? Like, we're going to meet and we're going to talk, because I thought, do we have more on in terms of bell hooks material, in terms of love? I'd love to get a little deeper into that.
Yeah, we can do more on that. We can
just thought, you know, what people may think of it, what you might think of it as you're passing by this on the replay.
Sure, we could take each section. I know we can't meet until September, but we could take each section and just expand it a little if you want, and speak to it and give examples and so on.
We will connect. I have a little commercial for you. We'll be right back.
So you have not subscribed.
So don't just comment or say it to me or send me an email. Subscribe to the channel. Here's what I do. I offer cultural sensitivity and awareness trainings, learnings called Double Consciousness. Those are amazing trainings. They are challenging, but they're amazing. And the feedback is great from these. It looks at people that came across the sub-Saharan trade, transatlantic slave trade, apartheid, colonization, this is in relationship to all people. This concerns everybody. We all have these biases and things that were instilled from generation to generation, and we just think, oh, that's just how I am. Well, it's also how somebody else was, and has been passed to you. It is not your fault or mine, but together we can do something about it. So those are the trainings, learnings, and out of that came my video podcast, Voices of Humanity, at prconnectionsradio.com, the voice of new media. Very proud of this little video podcast. The guests are fantastic. People come on with their genuine selves, just really looking at who they are, what they are in relationship to their biases. People tapping into their conscious unawareness, becoming aware first that they're unaware. I have a Korean brother that came on, my indigenous sister that gave us some real understanding of how her people, what lens they look through, and what is hurtful, what is offensive, just so that we can be aware of each other in the 21st century and treat each other well. So if you are in the upper echelons of management and maybe you get complaints and arbitration, you would like things to change, look at my trainings, look at the video podcast, Voices of Humanity. And the third offering that I have is my coaching. I'm a certified life coach endorsed by the International Coaching Federation, and I coach in the same area, double consciousness, anti-bias coaching, equity. I'm looking at all of these things in coaching, and what are your needs as I partner with you, especially if you're management and you really need that opportunity to tap into your conscious unawareness. And you'll be amazed how wonderful this can be and how it can change things for you. And the coaching, the other area I coach in is also women that have had extreme challenges in their lives, and want to leverage all of that into living their best life. And I would really love to hear from you. Subscribe, share, like. I appreciate you. Remember, it's not your fault or mine, but together we can do something about it. Take care of yourselves. Bye for now. All right, I got to cut that down. It's a nice video, but a lot of mercy. Anyhow, it's a pleasure. Thank you for joining us. Shout out to Jelly Social and Local Street. These are two groups that I collaborate with, wonderful people. You can find them on Facebook, Jelly Social and Local Street. Thank you so much for joining us. Remember, it's not your fault or mine, but together we can do something about it. Have a wonderful weekend. Pleasure, Lorrie.